5 months after their first epic battle in Montreal, Roberto Duran and Sugar Ray Leonard stood in the ring together, ready to put it all on the line once again. What neither man knew at the time was that this fight would not go the distance. In fact, it was to have one of the most shocking conclusions in boxing history. In their last encounter, Duran had won a hard-fought decision, but Sugar Ray felt that he'd figured out exactly what had gone wrong. Well before the night of the fight, Duran had waged a sort of mental warfare on Leonard, saying everything he could to intimidate and infuriate him. The final straw had come at the weigh-in, when Duran told Leonard in front of his wife that after he was done screwing him in the ring, he was going to screw her too. Duran had delivered on his first threat, trapping Leonard against the ropes, landing a barrage of sharp, tearing body shots and tight, powerful uppercuts. Duran had used his head, shoulders, and chest to wrestle Leonard into corners and knock him off balance, and grappling techniques to manipulate Leonard's guard and slip in punches from mere inches away. But Leonard had come back mid-fight. He gave everything he had, going toe-to-toe with Duran and producing some of the best action ever seen in the ring. But when Leonard had finally gained some momentum, he decided to brawl rather than box. He had let Duran get inside his head, and the hands of stone took full advantage. Duran clowned Leonard the last round, shoved him after the bell, knocked out his brother when he tried to get revenge, took the decision, and went home to a parade of over 700,000 people in his honor. Leonard had not been happy. He had rewatched the fight every day, every night, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Once he felt he had his answer, he demanded a rematch. Both men had huge obstacles to overcome in training. Duran had spent the last several months partying like it was his job, and had gained around 50 pounds. He had just 1 month to lose it. After a bit more partying, he got to work. Sugar Ray needed to prepare himself physically and mentally. Leonard always looked in the mirror before his fights to see who stared back at him. Would it be Ray Leonard, an ordinary man, or Sugar Ray, the flawless boxer? Their first fight, Leonard had looked hard for Sugar Ray, but he was nowhere to be found. Weigh-ins came, and astonishingly, Duran made weight, having come down from around 200 pounds. He felt the most drained he'd ever felt in his life. Leonard was a different story. The night before the fight, he closed his eyes and started shadowboxing, letting his hands go faster and faster. When he opened his eyes and looked in the mirror, it was Sugar Ray who stared back at him. The bell rang, and now, finally, he would have his shot at redemption. From the beginning, it was clear to Duran that this was not the same fighter he had faced 5 months before. Leonard had some of the greatest footwork ever seen in the ring, and he was putting it to good use. Sugar Ray was layering feints on top of each other, changing directions multiple times, and always staying one step ahead of Duran. To accomplish this, Ray used a brilliant strategy. First, Leonard would feint, either with a jab or with a quick step of his lead foot. He would then change direction, knowing that Duran was a talented fighter who could easily follow. But then, once Duran had fully committed, Leonard would change direction a second time, throwing Duran entirely off balance. As an additional benefit, each time Duran committed to Leonard's first direction change, he opened up more space for Leonard to move back to the center of the ring. While in camp, Leonard had practiced circling away the second he felt the bottom strand of the ropes touch his calf. This tactile response essentially let him have eyes in the back of his head, allowing him to navigate the ring on instinct. Near the end of the round, Duran did manage to corner Leonard, but Leonard ducked under Duran's right, hooked his body to turn him, and pivoted out, putting Duran in the exact position he'd been hoping to put Leonard in. Now Leonard pressed Duran towards the ropes, forcing him back with a 1-2, landing a body jab, and rebounding off of his rear foot to land with a hard right to end the round. Heading back to his corner, Leonard was confident that the fight was going exactly as he'd planned. In the second round, Leonard took his domination one step further. He displayed a new ability to move, punch, grapple, and infight all at the same time. Again, Leonard had learned these new tricks in training. He brought in a new sparring partner who idolized Duran and imitated his style. This got Leonard accustomed to Duran's rough style of infighting. Leonard invited his new sparring partner to fight dirty, asking him to throw elbows, headbutt, and throw low blows. By the end of his camp, Leonard could fight in a phone booth. Leonard had a chance to showcase these new skills near the end of the round, when Duran jabbed and level changed, looking to enter in low and charge into Leonard. But Leonard anticipated this and countered with a body hook and an overhand right. He then shuffled away before Duran could retaliate. Duran gave chase, switching into southpaw to follow Leonard, whose quick shuffle inside had moved him into a southpaw position as well. Leonard parried Duran's lead hook, stepped back, and pivoted into a lead hook of his own. He followed up with a right that Duran deflected off of his elbow. Duran was knocked off balance, but he wasn't one to give up easily. He readjusted and continued on with his attack, but Leonard was already L-stepping away, moving inside Duran's hook, changing direction, and countering with the left. Duran shifted forward again, this time managing to collar tie Leonard and pull him in tight, right where he wanted him. For all of his footwork, Leonard could not keep Duran at arm's length forever. But Leonard had spent weeks preparing for this, and snuck in a tight uppercut to Duran's jaw. Duran threw an uppercut of his own, but Leonard blocked it, tied up Duran, turned himself off the ropes, and landed another, harder uppercut. Duran wisely retreated to avoid the third. Leonard was showing that not only could he avoid the majority of Duran's attacks by staying at long range, but that he could also outscore him at close range. By keeping his free arm on the inside of Duran's, he could stifle his attacks, and pave a clear path for his own. Leonard again landed a powerful overhand right near the end of the round, and finished with two lightning-fast jabs that snapped Duran's head back. In his corner, Duran knew he needed to turn things around, and in the third, he did. Duran realized he couldn't fully commit to his attacks without Leonard leaving him in the dust, so he took his time cutting off the ring. He stayed lighter on his feet, stood more upright, and led with his jabs. Anticipating that Leonard would immediately dart away from any attack, Duran blocked his exit by controlling his hips, and then drove him into the ropes with his shoulders and head. But Leonard's improved inside work allowed him to hold his own. He was comfortable changing angles while clinching, and was using Duran's low center of gravity against him, pushing off of his head to turn him, and steering him into his punches. However, it was Duran who was landing the harder blows by far, slipping many of Sugar Ray's flurries and punishing his ribs. In the fourth, the battle continued to be waged on the inside. In the first serious exchange of the round, Duran entered with a 1-2, slipping inside of Leonard's counter jab. Leonard turned his punch into a collar tie, but Duran took advantage of the opening this created by spearing Leonard hard in his exposed ribs. Leonard straightened his arm to smother Duran, and then wrapped his arm to pull Duran into an uppercut. But Duran turned away. Both men threw at the same time, both missing. Then both men threw an uppercut, both landing. Then each man tried to flurry, but again, both were too slippery, their reflexes honed through years of intensive practice. It seemed like for every punch one fighter landed, the other would land an equally devastating blow. Heading into the fifth, Duran felt he had Leonard figured out, and that he could do some real damage if he kept up the pressure. But the weight cut was starting to have an effect on him. He was breathing hard, his arms felt heavy, and they were not even a third of the way through the fight. He decided he needed to finish it now, and put everything he had into this last round. Duran was patient at first, taking his time to set up his attacks. Then he turned savage. He charged into Leonard so hard that he was knocked off of his feet. Duran maintains to this day that it was a knockdown, but the ref counted it as a slip. Near the end of the round, Duran managed to pin Leonard against the ropes and brutalized him. He countered Leonard's tight uppercuts with lead hooks, tore into his body with tremendous pounding punches, and ended with a perfect cross to Leonard's temple, tracking his head movement as he tried to weave away. Leonard had taken a pounding, but Duran had expelled a lot of energy, and now he was feeling it. From his corner, Leonard tried to find a way to turn the fight around. He had noticed something during the last 3 rounds that he'd not picked up on in their first fight. Duran was watching Leonard's feet to time him, reading his rhythm, and using it to set up punches. Leonard decided he needed to better disguise his movements. He squared up his body as he circled around the ring. This was dangerous as it left him entirely exposed, but it also aided lateral movement. Leonard darted from side to side, breaking his rhythm and varying up his tempo, doing everything he could to remain unpredictable. It was working. Duran was tired and was unable to catch Leonard the way he had the previous rounds. But every time Leonard tried to land anything other than a jab, he would get tied up and speared in the ribs. Leonard was keeping distance, but not doing nearly enough to really hurt Duran. After the bell, he walked back to his corner, frustrated. To quote Leonard, as the bell sounded for the 7th, Duran was not close to being seriously hurt. It was up for grabs. I assumed I was ahead, but not by nearly enough, and there were 9 rounds left to go. One good poke, and it could turn in Duran's direction. Leonard was right. As of the 7th, the judges had him slightly ahead by only a few points. And through the first half of the 7th, Duran continuously caught Leonard with well-placed shots. That's when Leonard remembered something that his brother Roger, the same brother that Duran had punched out at the end of their last fight, had suggested to him during camp. He had told Leonard that he needed to provoke and embarrass Duran. Make fun of him, he had said, and he won't know how to handle it. Make fun of Duran? Leonard had asked. The man was a killer. But now, suddenly, Leonard decided it couldn't hurt to give it a try. And so, Leonard set out to enrage Duran. He repeatedly stuck his chin out and moved away before Duran could catch him. He danced and taunted, just as Duran had done the last round of their first fight. And Duran responded exactly the way Leonard had thought he would. Already tired, Duran's punches became wild and clumsy, and his timing was thrown completely off. But Leonard wasn't done. He wound up his backhand as if to throw a bolo punch, but instead he threw a jab. The crowd roared, laughing at the great Roberto Duran. The man that Frazier had compared to Charles Manson was now a laughingstock, the butt of the joke. Recalling the 7th years later, Duran would explain, "Of course I was frustrated, because I wanted to box, not dance salsa or play like a clown. I motioned him to come fight me, but he kept dancing. That's not boxing." Duran was furious. Of course, Duran's emotional, unrefined punches only made it easier for Leonard. He drove Duran into his shots, and then ended with an Ali shuffle. Duran had practiced psychological warfare in their first fight, essentially beating Leonard before the fight had begun. Now, Leonard had found a way to do the same during the fight, not with his words, but with his actions. After the bell, Leonard's coach begged him to stop clowning, scared he would get caught being reckless. Leonard agreed, but it didn't matter. Duran had already felt drained from the 50-pound weight cut, and now he had received an entirely new kind of damage. Duran's pride had been hurt, and he could not get back into the fight. Leonard had humiliated Duran in the 7th, and now, in the 8th, he would do to his body what he'd done to his pride. Leonard scored repeatedly on Duran, who was so infuriated, tired, and embarrassed that he seemed to have lost half of his skill in a single round. Sugar Ray landed nearly everything he threw, moving in and out and escaping off angle before Duran could do any real damage. With half a minute left in the round, Duran decided he'd had enough. In one of the most shocking moments in all of sports history, Roberto Duran, record of 72-1 with over 50 knockouts, the hands of stone, one of the toughest, meanest men to ever enter the ring, walked away, raised up his hand, and quit. Leonard, believing it must be a trick, rushed in and kept fighting, but Duran signaled he wanted none of it. The referee, thinking he must be misunderstanding Duran, motioned for them to fight. That was when Duran uttered the now famous phrase, "No mas." Duran wanted no more. There's been a lot of discussion over the years about exactly why Duran quit. Duran has always held that he was simply too drained and that he was suffering from cramps, having eaten 2 steaks before the fight. Leonard has always held that he humiliated Duran, and his ego simply couldn't take it. Perhaps the most interesting take on No Mas comes from one of his greatest admirers, Mike Tyson, who believes that Duran showed great courage in admitting defeat, and that sometimes it's more honorable to throw in the towel, rather than continue on needlessly. Whatever Duran's reasons for quitting, he had never considered the consequences. Duran had gone from scrounging for food in the garbage bins as a child to a national hero, but now he was seen as an outcast, a traitor to his people. Everyone but his family would abandon him, and it would be a long, dark road back to glory. Leonard, having avenged his one loss, set himself on a collision course with one of the most powerful boxers in history, the Hitman, Thomas Hearns. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to up your fight game, you can purchase my books on power and footwork. Forward Wins Fights is now in paperback. If you'd like to help me create more videos like these, I would greatly appreciate a donation to my Patreon. All of these are linked below. Let everyone know in the comments which fight or technique breakdown you'd like to see next. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.